Sleep well, sweetie, my daughter-in-law said as she locked my bedroom door from the outside. Through the window, I watched them pour gasoline around the house. My son struck the match, smiling. Their plan was simple: kill me and steal my $3 billion. But when they came back from their little alibi dinner, they didn't find a burned-down house. They found me sitting in the living room with the fire marshal. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let me tell you how a woman who built a tech empire from nothing discovered that her own family thought she was worth more dead than alive. Oh, and how spectacularly wrong they were. 6 hours earlier, I was in my hospital bed, pretending to be heavily sedated while my son Michael and his wife Lauren whispered their murder plans 3 feet away. Funny thing about being 72 and worth $3 billion, everyone assumes your hearing is gone. Mine isn't, neither is my memory, despite what they'd been telling the doctors. The pills aren't working fast enough, Lauren hissed. She could live another 10 years at this rate, Michael shifted. We can't speed things up. There's security footage, nurses checking every hour. We'll do it at home tonight. Make it look like an accident. I kept my breathing calm even though my heart was racing. Those two vultures had been feeding me increasing doses of Joxin for months, disguising it as heart medication. They thought I was confused and forgetful. What I actually was. Furious, I'd built Pinnacle Technologies from my garage in 1987. By 2010, we were worth $50 billion. I sold to Microsoft for $3 billion and kept enough shares to live comfortably forever. Michael was always lazy, expecting inheritance to fix his problems. Lauren was worse, a former pharmaceutical sales rep who knew exactly which drugs could mimic dementia in elderly patients. Fire would be perfect, she said. Old house, faulty wiring. She's been forgetting to turn off appliances lately. Actually, Lauren, I'd been documenting every single one of your poisoning attempts. But thanks for the character assessment. The drive home was surreal. Michael helped me to my bedroom with such tender concern you'd never guess he planned to murder me. Lauren brought me Timor Digitalis, no doubt, and kissed my forehead like a devoted daughter. We're going to dinner, Grandma Kate, she announced. Jeps, we made reservations for 7:30. Jeps was 45 minutes away. They were creating their alibi. The moment their car disappeared, I got to work. First, I called my private security company. This is Catherine Matthews. I need fire department and police at my residence immediately. Code 7. Code 7 meant family threat, imminent danger. Then I gathered evidence, the fake medication bottles Lauren had been using. Financial documents showing Michael's $2 million gambling debt I hadn't known about. The insurance policy they took out on me 6 months ago with them as beneficiaries. By the time I heard footsteps on the porch 40 minutes later, I was ready. The smell hit them first. Gasoline poured liberally around the foundation while I watched from upstairs. Then they saw the smoke detectors Michael had disabled blinking red again. I'd reconnected all of them. Lauren pushed open the front door expecting to find my charred remains. Instead, she found me sitting calmly in my favorite armchair, very much alive, with Fire Marshal Robert Chen and Detective Sandra Mills standing beside me. Grandma Kate, Michael exclaimed, face twisted with relief and terror. Thank God you're safe. We smelled smoke from the street. How thoughtful of you to notice, I replied. Especially since you're the ones who started it. The silence that followed was delicious. You know, what's better than a plan backfiring? Watching the planners realize they've walked into their own trap. Lauren recovered first. Sociopaths always do. Kate, sweetie, you're confused. We just got back from dinner. Look, we have the receipt. Her hands shook as she dug through her purse. Fire Marshal Chen stepped forward. Ma'am, we found accelerant poured around the entire perimeter of this house. The pattern indicates someone intended to trap whoever was inside. His tone was professional, but his eyes were granite. Michael's face went gray. That's impossible. Who would do such a thing? Detective Mills checked her notepad. According to Mrs. Matthews, she observed 2 individuals from her bedroom window at approximately 8:15 p.m. They appeared to be pouring liquid from red containers around the foundation. But we were at Jeps, Lauren insisted. The staff will remember us. I'm sure they will, I said pleasantly. Since you made such a point of being seen there, I said. Tell me, how did you manage to order dinner, drive 45 minutes home, attempt arson, and still have time to notice smoke from the street? You're either remarkably efficient criminals or terrible at math. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Mom, you're not making sense. Why would we hurt you? $2 million in gambling debts might provide some motivation, Detective Mills said, pulling out Michael's financial records, along with a recent $2 million life insurance policy on your mother. The color drained from Lauren's face. How did you get those records? I'll finish for you, I said. Darling, when you're worth $3 billion, you don't just assume your family loves you for your sparkling personality. I've had investigators monitoring both of you for months. Lauren's mask finally slipped. You paranoid old witch. You've been spying on your own family. Lucky for me, I replied. Since my own family has been trying to murder me. Fire Marshal Chen held up an evidence bag with an empty gasoline container. We found this in the bushes by your front gate. Fresh fingerprints on the handle. Michael stared at the container like it might bite him. Lauren, however, was calculating. I could practically see her scrambling for another angle. This is all a misunderstanding, she said suddenly. Kate's been having episodes paranoid delusions. We've been trying to get her medical care, but she refuses treatment. Medical care like the digitalis you've been slipping into my tea? I asked casually. The room went completely still. Lauren's eyes widened, then narrowed with rage. Detective Mills leaned forward. Mom, are you saying you've been poisoned? Systematically, for months, I confirmed. I have hair samples, blood work, and video surveillance showing Lauren adding medication to my food and drinks. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, that's insane. Lauren's been taking care of you. The medication is for your heart condition. What heart condition would that be, Michael? I've never had heart problems. But digitalis poisoning mimics dementia beautifully, doesn't it, Lauren? Lauren's silence said everything. Detective Mills stood. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, I'm going to need you both to come with me for questioning. This is ridiculous, Michael protested. She's a senile old woman making up stories. That's when I smiled my sweetest grandmother smile. Oh, honey, there's nothing senile about $3 billion and a very detailed will that, as of this morning, no longer includes either of you. The next morning, reporters swarmed my front door like vultures to roadkill. Billionaire tech pioneer survives murder plot. Family greed turns deadly. Silicon Valley grandmother outsmarts killers. I made coffee and watched the circus from my kitchen window. 30 years of carefully guarded privacy evaporated overnight, but honestly, I'd rather be a living headline than a dead footnote. My attorney, James Harrison, arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, looking like he'd aged 5 years since yesterday. Kate, this is a legal nightmare. The media attention alone could complicate everything. Good, I said, pouring him coffee in my world's most dangerous grandmother mug. I want Michael and Lauren to know exactly what they've lost. The police are charging them with attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy, he said. Lauren's also facing drug trafficking charges. Apparently the digitalis she used requires a prescription. She stole it from her old pharmaceutical contacts, I explained. I had my investigators trace the serial numbers. Very sloppy for someone who thought she was so clever. James sighed. Kate, they're your son and daughter-in-law. Are you sure you want to pursue this fully? I set my coffee cup down harder than necessary. James, they tried to burn me alive. They've been slowly poisoning me for months. How much family loyalty am I supposed to show to people who see me as a walking dollar sign? I understand your anger, he said gently, but consider the implications. Michael is your only child. Then maybe he should have considered that before trying to murder me for money. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Mills. Lab confirms digitalis in all food samples. Video evidence admissible. Case is solid, James, I said, showing him the message. I didn't survive the tech industry by being sentimental. I survived by being smarter than the people trying to destroy me. There was a knock at the front door. Through the window, I saw my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez holding a casserole dish. Behind her stood 3 more neighbors, all with worried expressions and covered dishes in hand. Kate, dear, Mrs. Rodriguez said as I opened the door. We heard about the terrible incident. We brought food within minutes. My kitchen was full of neighbors I'd barely spoken to in 15 years. They'd all seen the news, of course, but more importantly, they'd all had their suspicions about Michael and Lauren. That boy never visited unless he needed something, observed Mr. Patterson from 2 houses down. And that wife of his. He shook his head disapprovingly. Always asking questions about your business, added Mrs. Chen. Last month, she wanted to know if you'd mentioned updating your will. It was fascinating. Really, my neighbors had watched my potential murder unfolding in real time. Spotting warning signs I'd been too close to see. Double quotes Mrs. Matthews, said young Sarah from next door. I recorded some of their arguments. They were loud enough to hear through the walls. Should I give the recordings to the police? 20 minutes later, Detective Mills arrived to collect what amounted to an entire neighborhood's worth of evidence against Michael and Lauren. Apparently, I wasn't the only one documenting their behavior. As the neighbors finally left with promises to check on me daily, I felt something unexpected, gratitude. Not for surviving, I'd never doubted I would, but for realizing I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. My phone rang. James, calling from his office. Kate, I have news. Michael and Lauren's bail hearing is tomorrow. The prosecutor is asking for $2 million each. Perfect, I said. They don't have $2 million. That's why they tried to kill me in the first place, Kate. His voice held a warning note. James, I want you to attend that hearing. I want you to look my son in the eye and tell him that his mother, the woman he tried to murder, hopes he enjoys his time in jail to think about what family really means. The bail hearing was a masterclass in cosmic justice. I sat in the front row wearing my best navy suit and the pearl necklace Michael's father gave me for our anniversary. If my son was going to see me for possibly the last time, I wanted him to remember exactly what he'd thrown away. Michael looked awful. Orange jumpsuit, hollow eyes, hands shaking slightly from what the jail doctor said was withdrawal. Apparently his gambling addiction had grown to include cocaine. Lauren sat beside him, her usual polished image replaced by the unforgiving reality of county detention center beauty standards. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Patricia Valdez, laid out the case with surgical precision. Your Honor, these defendants systematically poisoned an elderly woman for 4 months, then attempted to burn her alive to cover their tracks and collect insurance money. Michael's public defender, a tired-looking man who clearly drew the short straw, tried a weak argument about family misunderstandings and stress-related poor judgment. Lauren's private, expensive attorney attempted to paint her as a devoted daughter-in-law driven to desperation by my supposed mental deterioration. That's when Judge Patricia Williams asked the question I'd been waiting for. Mrs. Matthews, you're present in court today. Would you like to make a statement regarding bail? I rose slowly, using the cane I didn't actually need for maximum dramatic effect. Your Honor, I spent 40 years building a technology company from nothing. I employed 3,000 people, paid millions in taxes, and donated over $50 million to charities. I did this as a single mother after my husband died when Michael was 12. The courtroom was silent except for the whisper of the court reporter's keys. I loved my son unconditionally. I paid for his education, his wedding, his house, his car. When he developed a gambling problem, I paid those debts too, hoping he'd learn something. I turned to Michael. He couldn't meet my eyes. When he married Lauren, I welcomed her like the daughter I never had. I trusted her with my health, my home, my life. My voice hardened. They repaid that love by trying to murder me for money they were too lazy to earn. Your Honor, these people saw a 72-year-old woman and thought she'd be easy prey. They were wrong. I sat down to absolute silence. Judge Williams reviewed her notes for what felt like 10 minutes. Bail is set at $5 million each, she announced. These defendants attempted to murder a vulnerable elderly person for financial gain. They pose a clear danger to the victim and the community. $5 million. Even if they had managed to steal my money, they still couldn't have afforded that. As court security led them away, Lauren turned and mouthed something that looked distinctly like a threat. Michael, on the other hand, was crying. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like angry bees. Mrs. Matthews, how do you feel seeing your son arrested? Relieved, I answered honestly. For months, I thought I was losing my mind. Turns out I was just being murdered. There's actually something comforting about knowing the difference. Will you visit them in jail? I paused, genuinely considering it. I'd spent 72 years being the kind of woman who forgave everything and forgot nothing. It nearly got me killed. I think it's time to try being the kind of woman who remembers everything and forgives nothing. That quote ended up on every evening newscast in the country. But the real satisfaction came 3 hours later when James called with an update. Kate, I have interesting news. Apparently Michael's cellmate is a gentleman named Rodriguez who was convicted of killing his mother for insurance money. How poetic. I murmured. Rodriguez has already explained to Michael exactly what happens to people who murder their mothers. In very colorful terms, I'm told. I smiled for the first time in months. James, I think I'm going to sleep very well tonight. 2 weeks later, I stood inside the empty shell of what used to be Michael's house, watching the moving company load my belongings into trucks. The bank had foreclosed when his gambling debts came out. Apparently my son had been more creative with other people's money than I realized. Mrs. Matthews? The moving foreman approached hesitantly. We found this in a bedroom safe. He handed me a manila envelope labeled insurance policies. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold, not just the policy on my life, but additional policies on my property, my car, even my jewelry. Lauren had been thorough, but there was something else, a handwritten letter and Michael's scrawl. Lauren, I can't do this anymore. She's my mother. Find another way. Dated to days before their arrest. So my son had developed a conscience at the last minute. How touching. Too bad it was about 4 months too late. My phone rang. Detective Mills, Mrs. Matthews, we've had a development. Lauren's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Cooperate how? She's claiming Michael was the mastermind. Says she was coerced, afraid for her own safety if she didn't go along with his plan. I laughed, surprised by how bitter it sounded. Of course she is. Lauren's always been smarter than Michael. She's probably figured out which one of them is more likely to get the death penalty. There's more, Mills continued. She's also claiming you've been mentally abusive for years. That Michael felt trapped by your financial control. Financial control? I could feel my blood pressure rising. I paid for everything in their lives without asking for anything in return. Exactly what control was I exerting? According to her statement, Mills said, you held money over their heads, threatened to cut them off whenever they disagreed with you, made them feel worthless. The audacity was breathtaking. Detective Mills, I have 30 years of bank records showing every gift, every payment, every bailout I provided to my son. Find me one instance where I demanded anything in return. That's actually why I'm calling. The prosecutor wants to meet with you. Lauren's defense strategy is shifting to paint you as a manipulative matriarch who drove your family to desperation. When? Tomorrow at 9 a.m. After hanging up, I stood in Michael's former house surrounded by the ruins of his failed life and felt something I hadn't in months, uncertainty. Not about my innocence, that part was clear, but about whether a jury would see it the same way. How easy would it be to paint a wealthy, widowed mother as controlling? How simple to convince people that $3 billion came with strings? I walked through the master bedroom where Lauren had planned my death. In the bathroom, I found prescription bottles she'd apparently missed when fleeing heart medications, all with my name on them, all containing digitalis according to the labels. But here's what Lauren never understood about being a successful businesswoman. You always keep detailed records. Every transaction, every conversation, every decision. I pulled out my phone and called James. I need you to access my private files. Security code 7749. There's a folder marked family financial history. Bring everything to the prosecutor's office tomorrow. Kate, what are we talking about here? 30 years of documentation showing every penny I ever gave Michael. Every conversation about money, every time I bailed him out of trouble. If Lauren wants to play the victim, let's show the jury exactly what kind of victim tries to burn her benefactor alive. How extensive are these records? He asked. I smiled, thinking of my decades in the tech industry, where documentation could mean survival. James, I didn't become a billionaire by trusting people's memories. I have everything. That night, I sat in my temporary apartment, a downtown penthouse with security. That would make the White House jealous, and reviewed 30 years of being the mother I thought I should be. Bank statements showed everything plain as day. Michael's college tuition, $180,000, his wedding, $75,000, 3 cars, $95,000, credit card debt paid off 5 different times, $340,000, gambling debts, $2,100,000, total given to my son in his adult life, $2,790,000, total requests for repayment, 0. Total expressions of gratitude. I'd need Lauren's cooperation to count that low. The prosecutor's office felt like a battleground, and I walked in ready for war. Patricia Valdez had spread my documentation across every inch of available space: bank statements, receipts, recorded phone calls, even photographs from family gatherings with timestamps showing Michael's various expensive gifts. Mrs. Matthews, she said, reviewing a particularly damning bank transfer, this is remarkable. You've documented every financial interaction with your son for 30 years. In my business, you learn that people's memories become very selective when money's involved. I replied, I prefer facts over feelings. She held up a recording device. And these phone conversations? I recorded all our discussions about money after his first gambling incident in 2019. Michael had a tendency to forget the terms of our agreements. We listened to several recordings. In one from just 6 months ago, Michael was practically weeping as he begged for help with a $400,000 debt owed to some very unfriendly people in Atlantic City. Mom, I'm dead if you don't help me. They're serious people. Michael, this is the 4th time you've said never again. What am I supposed to believe? I know. But I've learned my lesson. This is it, I swear. After this, I'm done. No more gambling, no more debts, no more asking you to clean up my messes. You said that last time. And the time before that. Mom, please. I'm your son. And then my voice, tired and resigned, transfer the money, James, all of it. Patricia paused the recording. You paid it. Every penny. As always. And here's Lauren's recorded statement from yesterday. She continued, playing a new audio clip. Michael was under constant pressure from his mother. She used money to control every aspect of our lives. We felt like prisoners in our own home. The irony was staggering. She was describing a prisoner who drove a BMW I bought, lived in a house I paid for, And wore clothes I funded. This next recording is particularly interesting, Patricia said. It's from 3 weeks ago. Michael's voice filled the room again. Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious. Lauren thinks, we think. Maybe it's time you considered assisted living. Assisted living? Michael, I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, but you've been forgetful. The bank called because you missed a payment on the charity fund. You never miss payments. Of course I'd missed the payment. I was being slowly poisoned and my thinking had become foggy. But in the recording, Michael sounded almost satisfied. I hadn't heard that at the time. That double quotes Mrs. Matthews, Patricia said gently. They weren't just trying to steal your money. They were systematically destroying your reputation and cognitive abilities. To make the theft look justified, the sophistication of their plan was almost impressive. In a sociopathic way. Create dementia-like symptoms with poisoning, document my confusion, build a case for incompetence. Then eliminate the inconvenient witness. There's something else, Patricia added. We found Lauren's computer. She'd been researching inheritance law, specifically how to accelerate the probate process for deceased persons with substantial assets. She showed me printouts of Lauren's search history. How long does probate take for murdered persons? Inheritance rights when primary heir is in prison. Life insurance payouts in cases of natural disaster deaths. She'd been planning for multiple scenarios. If the fire didn't work, she had backup plans, including one where Michael took the fall and she inherited everything as his surviving spouse. That hit me like a punch. Lauren hadn't just been planning to kill me, she'd been preparing to betray Michael too. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You can't hide behind lawyers forever. Old woman. Patricia saw my expression. Mrs. Matthews, that's witness intimidation. We can trace that number. Don't bother, I said, already calling my security company. Lauren's out on bond through some connection her lawyer found. I expected this. What do you mean? I smiled grimly. Patricia, I didn't survive 40 years in the tech industry by underestimating people who want to destroy me. Lauren thinks she's playing chess while I've been playing three-dimensional chess. She's about to learn the difference, Mrs. Matthews, Patricia said slowly. What aren't you telling me? That I've been recording everything. Since the day they moved into my house, including several conversations, where they discussed backup plans if their first murder attempt failed. Patricia's eyes widened. You have recordings of them planning contingencies? 3 months worth. Lauren's thorough, I'll give her that. She covered every angle except one, the possibility that her intended victim was smarter than her would-be killers. Lauren made her first mistake just 12 hours later. My security company called at 3 a.m. to report someone trying to break into my old house. The same one she'd attempted to burn down with me inside it. She's been watching the place. Detective Mills explained over the phone. Apparently she hid something there and came back to retrieve it. What kind of something? A second insurance policy. This one for $10 million. Taken out last week under your forged signature. The audacity was unbelievable. Even after arrest, trial, and the possibility of spending her life in prison, Lauren was still trying to profit from my death. When I arrived at the house, I found her in handcuffs, screaming at the officers about police harassment and wrongful arrest. The moment she saw me, her expression shifted to pure hatred. This isn't over, she snarled. You think you're so smart, but I know things about you that would destroy your precious reputation. Really? I asked calmly. Do tell. Your precious husband's death wasn't as natural as everyone thinks. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several officers turned to stare at me. Lauren, I said carefully, David died of pancreatic cancer. There were 4 doctors present, a hospital full of witnesses, and a thoroughly documented medical history, documented by you. How convenient that he died right after signing his will, leaving everything to you instead of Michael. Detective Mills stepped forward. Mom, are you making an accusation? Lauren's lawyer, who looked like he'd been dragged out of bed for this latest disaster, grabbed her arm. Don't say another word. But Lauren was beyond reasoning. She poisoned him just like I poisoned her. The only difference is she got away with it. Her lawyer's face went white. Several officers exchanged looks. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 30 years, genuine fear. Not because the accusation was true. David had died surrounded by medical professionals after a 6-month battle with cancer, but because Lauren had just shown how easily someone could cast doubt on the past when the only witnesses were gone. Detective Mills, I said steadily. I assume you'll want to examine my late husband's medical records, Mrs. Matthews. That won't be necessary, he replied. We have extensive documentation about your husband's illness and death. This appears to be a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt. But I could see it, a flicker of uncertainty on a few officers' faces. Lauren had found the one weakness I had. The person who could defend me was dead, however. Detective Mills added, "Mrs. Patterson, your accusation against Mrs. Matthews has been recorded. If you'd like to make a formal statement, we can arrange that." Lauren's lawyer slapped his hand over her mouth. My client declines to make any further statements as they led her away. She twisted free long enough to shout, "Check her medicine cabinet. Check what she keeps in her bedroom. She's not the innocent victim she pretends to be." Back in my car, I sat in the dark, trying to process what had just happened. Lauren had crossed from attempted murder into character assassination of a dead man. But she'd also revealed something important. She'd been in my house long enough to rummage through my personal belongings. I immediately called James. "I need you to meet me at my house, now, Kate. It's 4 in the morning, James. Lauren just accused me of murdering David. And she specifically mentioned my medicine cabinet and bedroom. She's been searching my house for something to use against me." 40 minutes later, James and I were in my bedroom with 2 police officers, trying to figure out what Lauren had been looking for. My medicine cabinet contained exactly what you'd expect from a 72-year-old woman: blood pressure medication, vitamins, and an old prescription for sleeping pills from after David died. But in my bedroom safe, we found something that made my blood run cold. An envelope labeled, "For Catherine, in case anything happens to me." David inside was a handwritten letter from my husband dated 1 week before his death. "Kate, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably grieving. But there are things you need to know about Michael and Lauren. They've been asking questions about my will, about your finances, about what would happen if something happened to both of us." Lauren specifically asked about medication interactions and whether certain drugs could accelerate illness. "I didn't tell you because I hoped I was wrong, but if I'm not, please be careful. Our son may not be the man we thought we raised." I sat on my bed staring at my husband's final warning, realizing that Lauren and Michael's plan had been in motion for over 2 years. They'd been plotting this since before David died. "Mrs. Matthews," one of the officers said gently, "this letter suggests your husband suspected your son and daughter-in-law might pose a threat to you." "Yes," I whispered. "He tried to warn me from the grave." The trial began on a Monday morning in October, surrounded by a media circus that would have made P.T. Barnum proud. Tech billionaire versus killer family. Mother's love turns deadly. The ultimate inheritance battle. I sat in the front row wearing my best black suit, the same one I'd worn to board meetings when I needed to project absolute authority. If a jury was going to decide my son's fate, I wanted them to see exactly who I was. Michael had lost weight in jail. He looked smaller, diminished in his orange jumpsuit. Lauren, seated at a separate defense table, had gone the opposite direction, playing up her youth and vulnerability in a conservative blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The prosecutor's opening statement was a masterpiece. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed so profound it transformed a son into a would-be killer, and a daughter-in-law into a calculating poisoner. The defendants didn't just want Catherine Matthews' money. They wanted her life." Michael's attorney tried the broken family approach. "Michael Matthews is a troubled man who lost his way. But wanting your mother's approval and inheritance isn't the same as wanting her dead." Lauren's lawyer went straight for the jugular. "My client was manipulated by an older, more sophisticated criminal, Catherine Matthews herself. The evidence will show that Mrs. Matthews has a history of using money to control people. And when that control was threatened, she orchestrated this entire scenario to eliminate threats to her fortune." That was interesting. Lauren was now positioning herself as my victim rather than Michael's accomplice. The first week of testimony established the basic facts: the poisoning, the financial manipulation, the fire. But during cross-examination, Lauren's lawyer revealed his real strategy. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, approaching the witness stand with a predatory smile, "you recorded conversations with your son without his knowledge, correct? I documented our financial discussions for legal protection. You spied on your own family. I protected myself from people who were stealing from me, stealing or taking what they believed they were entitled to inherit." The prosecutor objected, but the damage was already done. He was painting my documentation not as prudence, but paranoia. "Mrs. Matthews, in 30 years, how many times did your son ask you to stop giving him money?" I paused. I understood the trap. He never asked me to stop. He never said, "Mom, I don't want your help anymore." No, he never said, "I want to be independent." No, so he accepted your money willingly. Yes, and in exchange, you expected what? Nothing? You expected no gratitude, no visits, no inclusion in family decisions, no say in how the money was spent. Each question sliced like a scalpel. He was twisting my generosity into manipulation, my love into control. "Mrs. Matthews, when your son developed a gambling problem, did you seek professional help for him?" I suggested it, but you continued giving him money to pay his debts, yes. Didn't that enable his addiction? I was trying to protect him or control him. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room, replaying the cross-examination. Lauren's lawyer had done something brilliant and terrifying. He'd taken my love for my son and twisted it into something sinister. At 10 p.m. James knocked on my door. Kate, we need to talk about tomorrow's testimony. They're going to make me sound like a monster. Aren't they? They're going to try, he said. But we have something they don't expect. He handed me a manila folder. Remember when you had investigators following Michael and Lauren? They recorded more than just financial meetings. Inside were transcripts of conversations I had never heard, Michael and Lauren in their car. After visiting me in the hospital, Lauren, she's weaker than I thought. A few more doses and she won't be able to sign her name. Michael, what if someone notices the symptoms? Lauren, who's going to notice? You're her only family and you're helping me dose her. Perfect plan. Michael, I feel sick about this. Lauren, you'll feel sicker if those Atlantic City people kill you for the money you owe. This is survival, not murder. Michael, it's exactly murder. Lauren, no, it's evolution. She's old. She's alone. And she's in our way. This is just nature taking its course with a little help. I stared at the transcripts. James. This conversation happened 3 weeks before the fire, and it gets worse, he said. Look at page 4, Lauren's voice. The fire has to look accidental. Make sure the gasoline burns off completely. If there's any residue, we're finished. Michael, what if she wakes up? What if she tries to get out? Lauren, she won't. I gave her double the usual dose tonight. She'll sleep right through it. I set the transcript down with shaking hands. They had planned to burn me alive while I was unconscious. Kate, James said quietly. This is first-degree murder with premeditation. The death penalty is still on the table, outside my hotel window. The city sparkled with lights, families eating dinner, watching TV. Living normal lives where sons didn't plot their mother's deaths. James, I whispered. Play those recordings in court tomorrow. All of them. I want that jury to hear exactly what my loving family thought of me. The courtroom erupted when the recordings played. Michael actually vomited into a trash can when he heard his own voice planning my murder. Lauren stayed stone-faced. But I could see the calculation in her eyes, already trying to figure out whether this evidence could be challenged or whether her only hope was denial. The prosecutor let the recordings speak for themselves, then called the final witness, Dr. Sarah Chen, the toxicologist who had analyzed my blood samples. Dr. Chen, what level of digitalis did you find in Mrs. Matthews' system? Enough to cause serious cardiac episodes in someone her age. Another few weeks of exposure and she likely would have died of apparent heart failure. Was the poisoning detectable? Not without specific testing. Digitalis mimics age-related cognitive decline and heart problems. Most doctors would have attributed her symptoms to natural aging. In your professional opinion, was this poisoning sophisticated? Extremely. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge carefully calibrated the doses to create maximum confusion. While avoiding immediate detection, Lauren's lawyer cross-examined aggressively. But Dr. Chen dismantled every attempt to suggest accidental contamination or medical error. Then Michael's attorney tried one final desperate move. Dr. Chen, is it possible that Mrs. Matthews poisoned herself to frame my client? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several jurors looked at me with new interest. Counselor, Dr. Chen said, her voice cool and sharp. Are you suggesting a 72-year-old woman poisoned herself for 4 months? Documented the evidence, then set up an elaborate arson scenario to frame her own son? That would require the kind of criminal sophistication associated with master manipulators or sociopaths. Is that your professional opinion? My professional opinion is that the poisoning pattern indicates external administration by someone familiar with pharmaceutical protocols. The victim showed classic signs of unwitting ingestion, but the seed was planted. I saw it in the jurors' faces. Doubt, not about whether I was a victim, but whether I might somehow be the mastermind. During the lunch recess, Lauren's attorney approached me in the hallway. Mrs. Matthews, my client is prepared to testify that this entire scenario was orchestrated by you. Really? And how exactly did I orchestrate my own attempted murder? You discovered Michael's gambling debts and decided to eliminate him as an heir. You poisoned yourself to create evidence, then arranged the fire to make him look guilty. The audacity was breathtaking, and my motivation for this elaborate self-destruct would be to protect your fortune from a son you'd come to see as worthless. That afternoon, Lauren took the stand in her own defense. Polished, tearful, utterly convincing. She portrayed herself as a victim of Michael's desperation and of my supposed manipulation. I loved Catherine like a mother, she said, dabbing at her eyes. But she was controlling, demanding, impossible to please. She held money over our heads constantly. Can you give the jury an example? When Michael wanted to change jobs, she threatened to cut off our support. When we talked about starting a family, she said she wouldn't help unless we moved closer to her. Everything came with strings attached. And the poisoning? I never poisoned anyone. Catherine had been acting strangely for months, forgetting things, accusing people of stealing from her, paranoid about her food. I think she was having mental health issues and medicated herself. What about the fire? Here, Lauren's composure cracked just a little. I don't know what happened with the fire. Michael and I were at dinner. We came home to find the police there. It was terrifying. The prosecutor's cross-examination was surgical. Miss Patterson, you testified that you never poisoned Mrs. Matthews. Are you familiar with digitalis? No, you've never handled digitalis in your pharmaceutical career? I sold medications. I didn't manufacture them, but you would know how digitalis affects elderly patients. Yes. I would have basic knowledge, and you would know how to obtain it. Objection. Lauren's lawyer said, I'll allow it. The judge replied, Ms. Patterson, you testified that Mrs. Matthews was acting paranoid and forgetful. Did you encourage her to see a doctor? Yes, several times. But you didn't mention the possibility of poisoning to any medical professional. Why would I? I didn't know she was being poisoned. Yet you had the training to recognize digitalis poisoning symptoms. Lauren's silence stretched to long thigh. It never occurred to me, never occurred to you, the prosecutor repeated. Despite your pharmaceutical background, that her symptoms might indicate drug toxicity? Objection sustained, but the damage was already done. Lauren's medical knowledge had betrayed her. As the court recessed, I watched my son being led back to his cell. He looked broken, defeated, like a man finally understanding the full consequences of his choices. Lauren, however, caught my eye as she passed my row. Her expression held no remorse, no regret, just cold calculation and the quiet promise that this wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments and a verdict that would determine whether my son spent his life in prison or whether his wife's manipulation had successfully painted me as the real villain. Either way, I had already won the victory that mattered most. I was alive to see justice served. The jury deliberated for 18 hours. I spent that time in my hotel room, staring out at the city where I'd built my fortune and nearly lost my life, trying to make peace with whatever verdict awaited us. James checked in every few hours. They've asked for the recordings to be replayed. They want to review the financial documents. They're asking about the insurance policies. At 3 p.m. on the second day, we got the call. Verdict reached. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curiosity seekers, and a surprising number of people who had followed the trial obsessively. I took my seat in the front row, wearing the same black suit I'd worn throughout the proceedings, and waited to hear my son's fate. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Catherine Matthews. How do you find? Guilty. Michael's shoulders slumped. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, but Michael just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder. How do you find? Guilty. On the charge of arson in the first degree. How do you find? Guilty. Lauren's verdicts came next. Guilty on all counts, plus additional charges for poisoning and fraud. The jury had seen through her manipulation completely. Judge Williams set sentencing for the following week, though the prosecutor's office had already said they would pursue life without parole for both defendants. As court officers approached Michael to escort him back, he turned to me one final time. Mom, he called across the courtroom. I'm sorry. For the first time in months, I looked at my son and saw the boy I'd raised, not the man who tried to kill me. But sorry wasn't enough to undo for months of poisoning and attempted murder. I know you are. I called back. But sorry doesn't bring back the mother you threw away when you decided money was worth more than my life. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I did something I hadn't done since the night they were arrested. I cried. Not for Michael or Lauren. They had made their choices and would live with the consequences. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the love I believed was real. For the 30 years I'd spent loving people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. My phone rang. Detective Mills, Mrs. Matthews. I wanted to call personally to tell you that justice was served today, was it? I asked. My son will spend his life in prison. His wife will too. I'm alive, but I'm also alone. I'm not sure anyone really won. Mrs. Matthews, you survived. You fought back. You proved that wisdom and preparation can beat youth and greed. That's victory by any definition. After hanging up, I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Tomorrow, I would return home to rebuild a life without the people I had loved most. I had $3 billion. A mind still sharp enough to run circles around people half my age. and the rest of my life to figure out what happiness looks like when it isn't tied to family. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael and Lauren had tried to steal my fortune by taking my life. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift imaginable. They showed me exactly who they were. Before it was too late to protect myself, 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my new house in Santa Barbara, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and red. The house was smaller than my old one, but infinitely more peaceful. No family members plotting my death. No hidden cameras watching my every move. No medications being slipped into my food. Just me, my billions, and a future I got to write myself. My neighbor, Eleanor, brought me a glass of wine and settled into the chair beside me. She was 75, widowed, and had become the closest thing to family I had left. Any regrets? She asked, like she did most evenings. I thought about it carefully. About surviving? Not for a second. About the family I lost? Every day. But then I remember the family I thought I lost never actually existed. And the money was never the point. Michael could have had every penny if he'd simply waited for me to die naturally, and treated me with basic human decency in the meantime. Instead, he chose greed over love and lost everything. Do you think he understands that now? Eleanor asked. I think he understands that actions have consequences. Whether he understands the difference between love and manipulation. I shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I raised my glass in a private toast to the woman I'd been forced to become, survivor, fighter, and living proof that sometimes the best revenge against people who want you dead is simply refusing to die. Michael and Lauren had wanted to inherit my fortune by eliminating me from the equation. Instead, they'd eliminated themselves and left me with something far more valuable than money. The knowledge that I was strong enough, smart enough, and stubborn enough to outmaneuver anyone who mistook my love for weakness. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.